the sun.
Yeah, it's starting to get warm.
Now, are you trying to look like Robert Downey Jr. or is that just an accident?
No, I let it grow every year or two for a little bit. It's kind of like I let my face exfoliate, you know.
I did that when nobody had to see me during COVID, and man, I look like.
Yeah, I think I shaved on Easter.
Cool.
Because I went to go see my mom, and then I think I haven't. Well, I shaved the sides.
Yeah, but that's obvious. Looks cool though.
Yeah, it's coming off soon because it's too itchy and.
Yeah, that's what I found too. It's like ugh, it's like this big thing on your face, and it doesn't.
Yeah, I'm going back out to Southampton next week, so I'll probably shave before I go see Cordelia.
Yeah, good idea. That's a good idea. What does she think of your facial hair? She doesn't like it?
She likes the look of it.
Oh, really? Well, that's nice.
Yeah, but that's about it.
Yeah, exactly. It feels sort of crappy when, or so I understand, it feels crappy when you kiss one. Because Carol does the same thing. Carol's like, ew, shave. It's been like a day and a half. She's going, shave. I'm like, okay. But,
so I'm going to share my screen.
Yeah, please.
All right. So what I did was they gave us this list, but I didn't really use this because I wanted to look and see what exactly we had. You know, the first thing I did was I was like, if you count how many things, they have like 40 tables.
John, hold on 1 second. I'm getting this call from unknown. I hate that. Hello? You have him? Hi, how you doing? Good, thank you. Excuse me, can you hold on a second? I'm in the middle of a meeting. Oh, could you please? I mean, that'd be wonderful. In about half an hour? Half hour, whatever around then. Oh, that'd be great. Thank you so much. Okay, bye-bye. Okay, I was actually waiting for that call, so that was good.
You think we're going to be done in a half hour, an hour?
I think an hour. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Oh, if she calls me back, I'll tell her.
Well, we'll see. I mean, we could delay once you get the call or something. So anyway, they have this list, and not all of the tables are in here. That was the first thing I noticed. So I basically created a list of everything so that we can have kind of a definitive perspective as to what's in there, what has to migrate, and what doesn't. The other thing they gave us was that huge text file that I showed you. And that was too hard to manipulate and manage and search through to kind of get a feel for what the data is. So I basically broke it down, and every table that has data in it, you know, because a document they gave us, which looked like this, okay, contained a definition of the table. And then it had kind of right here, all of the data that was in the table so that it could be, you know, reinserted or saved or whatever.
Uh-huh.
So I took all the actual data out, and for each table, I basically created a new file that contains just the table. Like this is the table for avatars. This is all the data. So all of these lines, 400 lines came out of that large file, so that we can look at the structure of a table, like, what's in it. For example, if we go to, let's find something that you're gonna recognize. Like for groups, for blog photos, it has a blog ID, content type, which is a JPEG or PNG or whatever it is, the file name, the size, the width, height, which it uses for displaying that photo, the date it was created, and the date it was updated. So this one file tells us the definition of all the tables, what's in them. Then all of these different insert files that you see here contain the data for the various tables. So the one that's highlighted is all the data from the profiles table. That one's all the photos data, etc. So we can kind of look at some of the data to get an idea, is this data relevant to moving? Because in some cases, for example, with events, there's a lot of data in the events table, but if it's old events, we might not want to migrate it.
I agree.
If it's a future event, you might want to migrate it, So what I did was, this spreadsheet, I created a new tab in the same spreadsheet. It has all our tables. I kind of grouped them. You can see these boxes surrounding these sections. Okay, so I kind of grouped them based on tables that are related. For example, you have a table of all your users, but not all the user data is in the user table. Their email address is in a separate table. The tabs that they've defined and stuff are in another set of tables, etc. So if you look at this column, you'll see that the email address, for example, table, a foreign key is an ID number in one table that points to another table.
Right.
So in the email address table, you're going to have an email address and a user ID. And that user ID points to the users table to tell you whose email address it is.
Right. And that's really just a number, right? It's like user 4323 or something.
Yep. So then I went through and I looked at each table and I said, does the table have data in it? Some tables don't even have data, for whatever reason. Some things were never used, either intentionally, or some things were never used just because they never got used. I didn't do a full count of how many pieces of data are in each table. Like how many user records do we have, or how many group records do we have, etc. But I kind of, as I was removing all the data from that text file, the data dump that they provided, I kind of put an indicator as to whether there's a lot of data, a ton of data, not much data, etc. And the next two columns are going to be where we kind of define what tables have to be migrated, what data has to be migrated. And I think there's not much that we need to do as far as migrating tables, because they're going to have built all the database tables that they need. It's going to be a matter of migrating the data into the tables that they've built. And they come up with some kind of schema on how to convert the data.
Well, one thing I'm confused about is if you have my feeling of a relational database is that it's basically an Excel spreadsheet on crack. It does not only all the organization of a particular item, for example, a person. You'd have the user, and then next to it, you have the email address and your first name, last name, home tabs, and going on, right? And it seems like here they're splitting it out into different tables.
Well, that's normal. That's why it's called a relational database, because your user data is related to email data, is related to your tab data,
right,
etc. So, you break it into different tables, so it's not just one
massive thing,
gigantic table, because then your performance would be awful.
Right.
There's a lot of times that you need to look up the user ID, let's say for events or messages or groups or something. Like when I go to look at my profile, I want to know what groups I belong to.
Right.
So I don't want to search the groups table by a text string, which is my name or email address. I want to search by my user ID.
Right.
Because it's a numerical search. It's a lot better performing. You also don't want to load and search through a groups table or a users table. Let's say you're searching for a user. You don't care about most of the data for that user. You're looking either for just their email address or the user ID.
Right.
So you don't want to load all that other data into memory as you do that search.
Sure. Yeah, I get it. So, okay. So
that's where the term relational comes, because you have relations, and that's what these foreign keys are. These are your relationships. So for example, the email address has a user ID in it. That user ID points to a record in the users table.
Gotcha.
Group admins. Here's an example where you have multiple relationships. So you have a group admin table, which, seems to be a table of who can administer that group, who's the manager of that group. Well, that list has a group ID and a user ID.
Right, that makes sense.
So you can look in the group admin table without even knowing the name of the group or the email of the user, and find out whether a specific logged in person is an admin of that group.
Right, so it's also makes it able to have more than one user as a group admin. That's cool.
Correct. Yeah, because if it was in the group table and you had a list of group admins, you would have to restrict it to a finite number of people. You'd have to predefine, we're going to have 3 admins tops.
Right.
And then you fill it up, and to change it later is a major programming change for anything that touches that.
What seemed to me to be the coolest thing about relational databases, that they're more flexible.
Yeah, and it goes to the design. Like, you have to understand what you need, and then you get somebody to model that. And there's different levels that you can do for performance. The most optimized ideal setup is that you never repeat data in a database. Right. So, for example, an email address for somebody, a member, you want in the email address table, and you always save it. Anything that's related to that email address, you save it using the email address ID number.
Right.
You never save the email in multiple places. So, if somebody goes to change their email, you only have to change it one place. You don't have to change it in 20 different tables.
Right. That makes sense. That's great.
So, some of the tables are kind of one-off tables that aren't related to anything. Like, an example of that is this thing called subscription emails, which has data in it, not much, but it's not related to anything else. I don't know what it is. But it might prompt you to some functionality that people might have opted in to messages about UB Sports, even if they weren't like a member. Okay. So in that case, you may want to migrate this table because you have a use for it that's not really part of the site. It might be for some external function.
Can you
So,
search through the code itself, like just to do like a search button and go like I'm looking for subscription underscore emails and see where it leads to? Of course, it's a pain in the butt, but
I mean, yes, you could scour the code to find out how it got used in the site, if at all.
right.
Um,
But one of the things we have to remember is that it was adopted from that site izoka.com, and
right.
the guys who developed that were in Portugal, and they basically had every tool under the sun in that program because it came from I guess a program development tool from Ruby on Rails.
Yeah.
So
So,
a lot of stuff is not even like they never even used it.
yeah. So, you know, the subscription emails could be something that's legacy. Okay.
Right.
But anyway, we'll have to kind of look at it to see what it is and make a decision. But my point here is that here's a table that's not really related to anything else. And you might want to migrate that table because, oh, I forgot that we used that for our marketing email
That's what I
lists
was
or
thinking.
something.
Yeah.
You know, so that's what that is for. So we'll decide whether or not the table has to be migrated. In most cases, the table will not have to migrate. It's the data that has to migrate.
Right.
So we're going to focus on looking at what data is in here, what's relevant, what we migrate. That's what we're going to have to go through. And
And they gave you 40 some odd tables, and you actually found like 80 something, right?
yeah, I mean, well, 71, 74, you know, some of them weren't used. They might not have included the things that had no data in it because they would think, well, there's nothing to migrate. So
Well, they sort of would be right because if they're not using that call out in the new site,
well, hang on a sec. Look at this table, facilities, right? There's no data in there. Is that because it never got implemented? Or is that because no one ever created a facility on UB Sports? Like, so you don't know necessarily in
yeah,
certain cases, right? So they may have said, oh, well, there's nothing in here, so we don't have to migrate anything. We know that we have a facility mechanism in the site, like areas or whatever for training and something like that. So they've already built that into it. So it, you know, in the case of facilities, we're not going to have to do anything with it. So they may have left things off with good reason and maybe not. And ultimately, once we get through this, you know, exercise, I can go back and, you know, we can basically give them our list because this doesn't tell us anything. You know, they don't know what the complexity is until they actually look at it. So I don't know why they're saying, you know, that's kind of irrelevant without knowing what's there. Whether something needs to be migrated. They only said bulletins and email addresses, like, and sports. Like they didn't even pick up the users, right? So they didn't really do anything with this. So what they gave us is irrelevant. What we're ultimately going to give them back is something very similar to this with more specific instruction as to, you know, because we might have columns like in the database that we don't need now or don't have a way to capture, like when did a user join?
yeah.
You know, that kind of thing.
That again, we're going to start that now when we open the new site.
Yeah, you know, you might, if I think that there is in the users table,
I like the weather forecast one. That's what? Look
Yeah.
at that. Yeah.
So if we look at the users table and what kind of data is in there, you know, you have your birthday, you have your under 18.
The format of the birthday, is that like 4/10/58 or is it just like April 10th?
Oh no, it's probably got a year associated to it because
Okay.
it's a date. Um, but you know, there's like activation codes. Like we probably don't need to carry those over.
No.
They probably don't have a facility for that.
Right.
Maybe they do because when you send the invite link, it, you know, I don't know exactly how they built that link, but it might have a code. But they would have something like that
So they're
built
going to
into
have
it.
to not only take the ones that we give them and that they upload to the new system, but they're going to have to obviously have a bunch of new ones. So, and it's still using the same kind of database, right? It's still using the MySQL, right? MySQL.
Yeah, I mean that's irrelevant. You could use any database you want.
Sure.
It all kind of works the same. Syntax might be a little different in when you do things. In any case, so let's start looking at some of this. We'll kind of go through some of the easy ones that I've already picked out that I know we don't have to do anything with. These bottom four here, these open IDs. Open ID is a way to use a centralized cloud authentication system,
Right.
which they were probably preparing to use, but they never ended up using. So we don't need to do anything with those. Okay, and you can see that there's a table called user open IDs. It has a user ID in it. So when someone would enter their email address, you'd be able to find their user ID, and then you would see, okay, here's their open ID, and then pull all of their open ID information so they can log in.
Okay.
So that's kind of how that would be related, but that never got implemented. So we don't have to do anything there. It's a no-brainer. These next five here, these seem to be, based on what I can tell, system-related things that are only necessary in the way that their system was built or the existing system was built. So I'm not sure what typist users are, but there's only two records.
Alex was my programmer, and Hugo was the head of the Portuguese guys.
Right. So there must have been, that might have been some sort of, I don't know, plugin or tool on the website that they would use to do things. Okay. Clearly, without even knowing what exactly it is, we don't need it because we have our admin panels and stuff like that. So, you know, that goes away. We don't have to do anything there. System
We have to kill those
job log. Oops, my screen went black. System job logs had nothing in it. Is my screen kind of flashing on your end?
That's just black. That's just black.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on.
There it is. There it is.
I might have to reconnect.
Okay.
I'm not sure what's going on. We'll see what happens. System job logs, you know, simply kind of seem to be something the system would log when they ran batch jobs overnight. You know, the job name, when did it start, and were there errors, the status, et cetera. Okay, but they didn't even use it. We don't need that. Schema migrations seems to be kind of a list of versions. Okay, all it has is a version number. And if you looked at the data, it started out being 1, 2, 3, 4, and there was like a dozen. And after that, they started using a date as the version number. So we don't necessarily need that. We'll be able to track that through the Play Store things and our deployment mechanisms. Delayed jobs, I'm not sure what delayed jobs are, but if you look at the data that's in that, clearly, you can see that there's a job called group membership notification job. So on a periodic basis, and then it has, you know, a group membership ID or something. So I'm not sure exactly what it was tracking, but it was recording these batch jobs, something related to group notifying someone or something about group membership. Event notifications. You can see that here's the notification, like what it was notifying you about. So Monday training by Greg Burton back in 2015.
Okay.
So whatever kind of batch jobs they were running, delayed jobs makes it sound like this is the data the job will need when it eventually runs overnight tonight. That's kind of what I take from this. We don't need this because whatever functionality we needed is built into it. And then cached versions, I can't quite tell what that was, but it contains a user, a group, a community, which is basically like a city, and a category. So I don't know exactly what it was doing, but by the name of cache version, it sounds like it was caching data, the most recent data for a view or something. So maybe as users, like a user would sign in and go to a group page, it might cache a version of that page for a period of time.
Right.
You know, so anyway, we don't need that. So those 5 things were system related, and I just don't think that we need any of that.
Cool.
There's something called notification groups, which to me sounds like you could set up a group of people or a group of groups, and then you could send a notification to a specific group instead of to 100 users. It's kind of like sending it to a group list in email. But any case, it's not in use. There's no data there. And I don't think we have it.
That for the new apps for the trainer, especially what we had the conversation yesterday with the fitness trainer app. They have to set
Yeah,
up.
like whatever functionality they've built into it satisfies that. I mean, I don't know if you can create a group. So let's say, like, if I want to send email only to specific members, like a message, like I think the way they've built it is, you know, the group admin can go into the group and send a message to the entire group. Okay. But there's no facility for them to say, well, I'm going to create 50 groups, notification groups, one for each state. So when I want to message just people in New Jersey, these are the people I want, et cetera. So if we haven't asked for it, you know, there's just no need, there's no data. So that doesn't have to be migrated.
Agreed.
Facilities likewise has no data in it. We have what we need for facilities at this point. The whole facility manager thing and scheduling ultimately is a future phase. Yeah. So whatever we need regarding facilities will be built to accommodate that.
That's one thing we didn't talk about yesterday was the multiple rooms in a workout facility, in like a yoga studio with 5 rooms. We didn't actually cover that. And I was thinking about that last night. Okay, sorry. Okay, beta
Well, I
registration.
think you can define, I mean, you can define different areas and those areas are assigned to a studio. So that would give you 5 rooms.
Yeah, that would make sense. I didn't, I don't remember that part on the, that's on, I saw in the athletic trainer app that had that, but I don't know about the fitness trainer apps. But I think you might be right, actually. It was there too. All right, so
Yeah.
what's,
And then there's this,
sorry, I got to
then
talk.
there's, that's right. Then there's beta registrations, which is empty. I have no idea what this is or why it would be called beta. Maybe they were attempting to change the way when you register your user profile, or maybe when it was in, when they were beta testing a new version of the site and testers were creating these registrations, maybe that's where they would go, you know, to keep them out of the main database.
Yeah.
The definition of it, just so you can see, I mean, it has an email, a first name, last name, zip code, organization.
Right.
You know, the ID is an automatically assigned number by the database. That, you know, that's a sequential number. The created ad or updated ad, et cetera. So it's very similar to a user registration, but with everything all together for like beta testing. So anyway, that doesn't have to go. We don't need that.
Right.
The definitions table, if we look at that data, that seems to be basically content that would be displayed on the site. Okay, so the term active discussions, like you would click on that word and it would tell you this.
Right.
Like it must have come up in like a pop-up, or if you hover over it, never-ending events, an IZ card, which is an old obsolete thing, group visibility. So there must have been like these terms were defined on the website. And if you hovered over it or clicked on it, it would give you a description, just like having like those little question mark icons next to things that give you little help tips. So I don't believe that we need these things because we've created that as part of our design already.
Right.
You know, we've needed. Subscription emails, let's take a look at that, because, you know, it sounds important, but you can see that the first bunch of them are people that were testing it, right? Yeah. Imaginary Cloud, yourself. You can see some of the names. And if you look at the last record, you'll see that nothing's really been done with this outside of after 2014. So whatever it was used for, I don't think it's really relevant.
Agreed.
Right.
All right, so let's hack them.
Then there's these things called founders and founder racers. So I don't know if you recognize those 3 names, but those are the only ones in there.
Jeff Schuler, I don't know. Lane Alfano and Jeff Aubrey, I do. So they were one of the first people we were like world-class athletes. Jeff is a NBA player, and Elaine was the world champion fitness person back in the 90s.
So like, what do we need like?
If that's the only thing there, I think no.
I mean, I don't know if there was a page on the site where you identified who the founders of the site were.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so I mean,
we had them keyed in there for some reason. I don't see a need to carry that forward though.
Okay. Invitations contain data. If you look at the foreign keys, it identifies a user, a group. I'm not exactly sure what the admin ID is. The from user ID. So there's 2 users identified in an invitation, who it's from and who it's to and for what group. And then there's a parent ID, which presumably is, if you were inviting a child, it would also put the parent ID in. So if we look at that data, it's conceivable that you would want to migrate any invitations that are active. But if you look at the most recent ones, like there's only a couple that are in 2021. And if you look up these user IDs that are in here, which are these guys, most of these recent ones are all iLeaf people or people like Bill Clark or yourself. The most recent real one is this one, which is something about African cycling.
Yeah, I remember sending that.
In any case, you're 6 months removed from really the most recent real invitations. If somebody hasn't joined, I think it's irrelevant. So I don't think we need any of this.
No, I dropped that data.
Let's skip those 2 for now. There's something about API keys, which must be a way for you to securely view or subscribe to like a calendar or something. But these are the only 2 people
in that.
Yeah, so I don't know who they are, what they are. And I'm not sure what functionality they fulfilled. If you look at the data, they're called member calendar API keys. So it's something about a member calendar that allows you access to it.
All right.
And it has this code, which is your token for access. In any case, whatever it is, I don't think we need that.
Could that have been like on a Google Calendar or something like that? Not that it's relevant.
Could be.
You can toss that.
Could be.
Okay.
Yeah, if there's something that you could pull in your Google Calendar into the site,
yeah,
or access it from a tab, maybe.
Yeah, that's the only time I'd see those kind of things being used. All right, see event exceptions. So yeah, I say no on that. We don't need that. I'm sure they're going to do their own if they're doing that kind of stuff.
Okay, so one more, let's look at recent activity. If you look at what that's related to, recent activity records will identify a user, a group, a parent, presumably if the user is a child, authored thread, and a parent recent activity ID. The other thing is the parent recent activity ID tells me that these things are nested. So you can have this recent activity lead to the next recent activity, lead to the next one. It's like a chain of events.
Of course.
I'm not sure what all tracking we have in the admin control panels off the top of my head, but I don't think that any activity from the old site is going to be relevant to the new site.
I agree.
So I don't think that we should do it. And it's a ton of data that would have to be migrated.
What does that look like?
It'll take a second to load.
Wait to volt.
So this is one.
Now we are going to
Let me
have
get
something
this.
like this, aren't we, to track where users are going and during
Right.
their days. That is going to be an
But
immense.
either it's already built into it based on what we've told them we want, or we would need to tell them that we need additional stuff, which would be kind of new development if we didn't already identify it.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So it's 2714.
yeah, to give you an idea of what it really looks like, hold on. Let me,
Volt. There's parent ID, parent type.
let me put this in here for now, just so we can see. So this first number is simply the ID in that table. So if you look up an activity, each of them have a unique ID. That's that. So this is
That's
group
like a visit
860.
ID. Like when they come to the site, they get visit ID.
Yeah, but this is an activity ID.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so every table that has a record, every record in every table has an ID number that's unique within that table, you know, and that's how you identify everything.
Okay.
So the second is a group ID and then user ID. So this is group 861 and no user. Not sure why.
Yeah, it's weird.
This is the state. This is the parent ID, which might be why there's no user, because it's referring to the parent, because a parent is doing it perhaps. The parent type, this is calculated at when it was created, when it was updated. This is the type of activities, which seems to be that this is a group membership activity record, right?
Yeah.
Et cetera. And whether that activity is public or not, and they all seem to be no. And you'll see that it's been tracking through April. So this is a live part of the site. I don't know that these activities really apply because everything is built differently in the new site.
Right.
And whatever mechanism we need for tracking in the admin panels is going to tell us that you had, you know, these people joined these groups, you know, whatever kind of metrics we want. So I don't think recent activities needs to go. You know, it's not worth spending the effort there. If we ever need to look back at the old site for stuff, we'll still have the original data.
Right.
You know, that we can recreate. The last one is contacts. And of course, contacts identifies the user, the group, the profile, and the friend's user ID. So this table seems to be this, you would have a bunch of records in here for all your friends.
Right. That makes sense.
So the user ID would be the one for Greg Burton. I don't know if groups can have friends, but I don't understand exactly how the group plays into contacts. And the profile ID. So the user and the profile ID are distinct, they go together. And then it tells you who the friend is so that you can put their information, their name, their picture, etc.
Right.
So it would seem to me that we definitely want to migrate this data.
Yeah.
Right? Because you want to keep friends, things of that nature.
Agreed.
And if we take a look at this, I think 39 user 3927 and 3926 are yours.
I think I agree. I was just looking at that on UB Sports, and I can't see it on my view.
Yeah, here's 3927 is your Greg at UB Sports.
Yeah.
And 3926 is Alex.
Okay, cool.
Okay. So if you look at the first set of contacts in here, which was when you guys were testing it, apparently, these 59, 60, those are the users who have added you and Alex as friends. Okay.
Right.
So let's look up who those users are. 57, 59.
Wow, that's a big database.
So these are the people that you can see initially. There's Jay Weekly, Java Adam something, and this email address too. So these people were adding you and Alex as friends.
Okay.
So that's kind of what it tells you. There is a lot of data in here. Let's see. There's 314,000 rows. Let's say that's 6, 12, 18, 25 rows.
I put 15,000
per person. So 314,000 divided by 25 is, there's like, I don't know, 15,000 friends.
Yeah.
Of people. So they'll have to figure out basically how to populate this into the existing model that they built. So they will pull data. They'll have to read this contacts table. And then they have to do a lookup into the user ID, into the group ID, into the profile, and into the friend ID.
Right.
And they'll have to figure out how to sandwich that into the new database. That's kind of what their effort is going to be.
That's probably one of the larger tables too.
It's not actually. I rated it lots. There's many that are tons.
Oh my God.
In any case.
But that's all searchable. It's just a regular database. You're going to search by member number and find what you need.
Right.
Right.
Okay, so those are the things that I was kind of able to get through and had a handle on because they were smaller, they were simple to deal with. There's no data to look at. So the next things, which are the most important for us to move over, are calendars and events, messages, photo albums and photos, the groups and all their related data, all the users and all their data, the sports, and then of course there's these 3 random things. But I don't think we have any facility for them. First off, weather forecasts, I don't know where they were supposed to come or what the idea was, but they were related to a community. The communities are basically cities. Like there's a community record for like,
Are they related to the zip codes?
the zip codes are related to the community.
Right.
Okay.
Is zip codes
And
just
then the weather
five-number things?
What?
Is zip codes file just a bunch of zip codes? Because it might be that
Yeah.
that was taken from that geolocation thing that had all the zip codes and the towns associated with the zips.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know if it contains all the zip codes, or if it's just ones where a community was defined. I don't know how communities got defined. The groups, if you look at the groups table, you'll see that it's related to the community. So somehow right now, if you create a group, you must input a community.
You put down the zip code.
Okay. So if you put down a zip code, it looks up in the zip code and it finds the community. So if you put in 11963, you're going to get Sag Harbor, New York as the community.
Right.
So when you
vice versa,
create,
I'm guessing that if you put in this state and the town, you would get the zip code.
yeah, I don't know. I mean,
Right.
I don't know. It's possible that it worked that way too, because you could look up the community, the city, and it would then populate a zip code. That programmatically, that wouldn't make sense because cities have more than one zip code. Think of New York City.
Yeah.
You know, you wouldn't pick just one zip code. You would go the other way. You would put in a zip code and identify the community.
Right. And then
But-
it's just you have to go through asking you which zip code of these 8 is yours, which would be a pain in the butt.
Yeah. So I don't think we need any of these things at all, because
We're going to redo that. So
yeah, like they're using the geolocation from
Yeah.
Google and everything else. So I don't think we need any of these. Now, the main thing that I want to point out with this guy is that obviously when they go to convert the groups, they're going to ignore the fact that there's a community that it belongs to. But
so they're going to need this community's ID in order to geolocate
Right.
things that are already there.
So we're not gonna migrate communities or zip codes, but when they migrate the group, they're gonna use the existing relationship to a community to pull out the zip code.
Right.
And they may not be able to pull out the zip code.
If we don't have those 22, 23, and 24 up there.
Well, we'll have them in the old database so they can look them up. But if the group says, here's the community ID, and I pull out the community, and then I go to look up what zip codes go with this community, I may get more than one zip code. So for existing groups, when they do the migration, they may not be able to identify the correct zip code.
Oy.
So let's say there's a group for New York Squash Club, zip code 10001.
Right.
Okay. So the group table is going to identify the community as New York, New York. So when they go to do the migration, they're going to say, okay, here's the New York Squash Club group. The community is New York. So I can go to the zip code table and pull out all the New York communities because by that community ID. And I'm going to get a list of 100 zip codes.
Right.
So that the migration will not be able to populate a specific zip code, for example, for a group.
Right. It's just going to have the community.
Yes.
What
So back to the my initial point is that even though we will not migrate communities and zip codes, we will be using communities and zip codes during the migration in order to give us data that the groups rely on.
I understand. Okay. So we do
Okay.
need that to be sort of legacy hanging out, waiting for the last pull.
Right. Right.
Ah,
And
this is
for
why-
example,
Hold on a second. Hello? This is Mr. Burton. Hi, hold on 1 minute while I stop this thing and talk to you. Please hold. Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna have to take this.
okay, text me when you're done.
Thank you, man. This is great. Thank you.
Anyway, the takeaway right here is that we went through the simple shit that we don't need to deal with. The
Okay.
most important has to be viewed, and that's going to take some time. So
Okay, I'll
just
come
text
back
me
and
when
I'll
you're
have
off the
it.
call.
All right, thanks.
Yep. See you.